All right. Good evening, everyone. We had a uh, a basketball game at Barclays tonight, so I will be joined by one of our creatives at Black Rosie Media, Joveta Rodriguez, and we're going to talk about the Seattle Storm at New York Liberty, and we also have some fun surprises. We're going to name in case you haven't figured out what the name is, we're going to give you the name of the new Seattle Storm podcast. And we have two little logos that we're going to use now. But let's hit that intro and then we'll come back and talk about some women's basketball. Gotta get up. Gotta get up. Gotta get up. Hey, women's basketball fans. Welcome to Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans brought to you by Black Rosie Media and hosted by Erica L. Ayala. Oh man, it never gets old. It never gets old.
It doesn't. It's so good. It's so catchy. I love it.
It's so good. Well, Joveta, thank you so much for joining me post game. I know I've got to go get some sleep. I know you have some things that you have to run and do. So we're gonna keep this pretty tight. That being said, though, I found out something about you on social media that I thought was super cool. Yeah, you posted about you and your now wife. You posted,
yes.
and it relates to the Liberty and WNBA. So now, if I remember the tweet, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but you effectively were on a date. You invited your now wife to a New York Liberty game at Westchester County Center.
Yeah, I really thought that I had game, because if that was my idea of date, I really had to be very sure of myself. Alas, it worked. We actually celebrated our 5th anniversary this Monday. It was very funny. Thank you. So we have a very kind of
is parabéns? Is that?
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. So we have this weird timeline where we had 2 dates, and then at the time they were working somewhere that they had to spend a month in Europe for work. They came back, and then our second date, when she was back, the Minnesota Lynx was coming to play in New York, Westchester at the time. And I already had have a good relationship with Damiris Dantas, who was at the Minnesota Lynx. And she was like, "Do you want tickets?" And I was like, "Yes." And I was like, "Why not impress this person that I'm dating? Because I have tickets that are very close to the court." Well, in Westchester, I was not close to the court. But it was actually really cool. Oh my God, we were in the early stages of dating. I lived in East Harlem, so I was at least on the green line, so I could go straight to 125th, and then switch to MTA. For the New Yorkers, you know what I mean?
Yep, I lived. So wait, now I have another. Well, I'll ask you those questions offline. Well, you don't live there anymore, but I lived in East Harlem too around that time. But it was working as it turned out in White Plains. But anyway.
Oh, I lived in Westchester too. It's my wife lived in Flatbush at the time. It was such a commute. Yeah. Anyways, ended up going. They did get very impressed because I had already had interactions with Cheryl Reeve before. So Cheryl Reeve, I talked to the meetings later. She was like, "Oh my God, so happy you're here." And then Cheryl Reeve was like, "Oh my God, so good to see you. You have to show up to Minnesota." And that for them was really impressive. They were like, "Oh my God, you're so cool."
That's amazing.
Anyways. Yeah.
Wow. And then I tweeted back at you, "You found love in a hopeless place."
Oh my God. Going to Westchester was always a struggle. I went there a few times, but it was always and games were at 6-7 games were always peak time for MTA. Again, if you're from New York, you know what I'm talking about. You don't want to be on 125th or any MTA line at at like 5 p.m., 6 p.m. with all the finance bros going back to the
right. And then it's also in the summer, so you've got the Yankees
Oh my
fans.
God, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It was
the
like,
best. Go ahead, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was like, if they, it was just, it ended up being so fun. I mean, like I said, it worked because we are together, and at the time, they didn't know much about the WNBA, but it shows that it really makes a difference when you have access and have knowledge of the game, because now they are obsessed. And
I love it.
yeah,
Made a fan, made
yeah,
a family. I
made a
love it.
wife. Yeah.
I love that. That's an amazing story. Well, for those who don't know us, again, my name is Erica El Ayala, the founder here of Black Rosie Media, and we have Roberta Rodriguez, founder of Beta Basket, and will be joining me for our endeavor. So we have been talking about the Seattle Storm podcast. We effectively announced and soft launched the podcast right before the Olympics. You've contributed in a few different ways now, but we are ready, Joeta,
We
and
are ready. We
we
are
are
very
ready
ready.
to talk about it. And so
Yep.
here's what we're working with. So I
I am
love this.
very excited.
I love this. So I'm gonna let you do the first pronunciation. I think my pronunciation is pretty good, but I know that you are the Brazilian. So tell us about this name and what it means.
So the name of the podcast is Tempestade Talk. Keeping an eye on the Seattle Storm. Tempestade is storm in Portuguese, and I think it's very close to the word in Spanish, right? But I think in Spanish it doesn't have the E at the end. We had been considering a few names. We had some really cool puns. We had like some very like storm Seattle puns, but I think that the Tempestade Talk just has like a good sound to it, and it has that mix of like you bring both Erica and mine's Latino side, and you also bring that internationality to the conversation in the WNBA, which I think there's a huge gap right now in the landscape of WNBA media. So it was just like when Erica mentioned that, I was like, yep, that's all we're gonna go with. That's really cool. Uh, and I'm just very excited because it brings a little bit of the Brazilian side, and that's something that Erica knows that whenever I can, I'll bring some of that, of the gingado, the Brazilian swag.
Yes. Was
uh,
it Gingado?
gingado,
I think everything
Gingado.
just sounds so smooth in
Yeah,
Portuguese.
it's really
Gingado.
cool.
Ooh, all
Yeah,
right.
just think of like someone dancing the samba. That's how we call like gingado.
Oh, gingado. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yes. And to your point, yes, I mean, the word in English also tempest, it's a
hmm,
play on a word that in a lot of different languages refers
yeah,
to a storm, like usually a pretty fierce storm. So we thought that would work for the Seattle Storm podcast. But
yeah. It worked really well.
and so I don't think I even Horeta shared this with you or the Gotta Get Up co-host yet, but I was like, okay, we kind of have this logo that we're gonna rock with, but I was like, we don't have an official Gotta Get Up logo, and I was like, how do we not
Oh,
have a Gotta Get Up logo? And so I was playing
yeah.
around with some things, and I've told this story before. Maddie, always near and dear to my heart.
Oh,
But Maddie, the mascot, the original mascot, Ari Chambers has talked about this when she used to work at MSG, and of course with the New York Liberty. She would hold up the E sign. That's my favorite part. I'm so glad they still do it in
that's
Barclays,
amazing.
where they're spelling New York Liberty. Obviously, we use it in the Gotta Get Up intro.
Yep,
So I knew I wanted to incorporate something like that. We can't
that's
deny
really cool.
though. We can't deny though that Ellie the elephant All right. Even Flav got put on to Ellie the Elephant in a big way tonight. We can talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to incorporate some of those things into a Gotta Get Up logo while also making it New York. I mean, with Tempestagi Talk, we have the Space Needle. That's iconic Seattle. And also I wanted to utilize something in Seattle that is at least close to Climate Pledge Arena,
exactly.
So I like that as well. So I was thinking like what would make sense, what's kind of quintessential New York and things like that. But before I show that logo, I want to just say hola, Damien. Thank you so much for joining us always. Ronnie, what's good from down south?
Hello.
How y'all be? We be good.
Eric is very happy with the Liberty win.
Yeah, well, okay, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this game because I know I was saying for those who are members of our Slack community, that I felt that this game was a little clunky, or I liked there was a term that Roz used on the broadcast because I was watching on Prime Video, and she used actually a musical term of what is it, staccato, right? The kind of choppiness of music. She was actually talking about the Seattle Storm, but I felt that there was a little bit of a choppy game. And so in a little bit, we're going to get into, I want to look at the box score. For those who've been watching and listening for a while, I love looking at the game flow chart. So we have that for you. But I know I teased it, so I might as well. I'm so bad at keeping like surprises and secrets. I'm just like, once I say something, I want to put it out there. So here's what we're working with. Gotta Get Up.
That is so cool.
Yes, queen. Oh man, Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. You've got the subway tile in the background, very New York. The E, as I mentioned, which is just, there's so many ways that I can go and so many directions I can go in that. And then the Ellie silhouette, had to go with Ellie the Elephant, just iconic. She's the moment, all of those things.
Wasn't she on a show recently? Like just 6 months or something?
Cameron, what's her last name? I forget because I don't watch daytime TV. But yes. Hey, Hannah, thank you. Yes, so we're rocking with it. We have logos now. We have names now. I know I mentioned the Slack channel, but if you're not already a part of our Slack community, please do join us there. I mean, we're still very much in the iteration phases, but the whole goal is to be able to have a community that's really ours. Unfortunately, things get very toxic on social media these days, and it's hard to have an educated conversation at times, it feels like, about women's basketball in particular. So I'm going to drop the link for you as well here. Join us in Slack. It should be, I'll make sure that it is on our social media handles. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that during the Olympics, I'm wearing my Olympics hat here. I was experimenting with some new platforms for a newsletter. So we're going to have, because we have Tempestagi Talk, because we have Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans, we're going to now utilize some of that content because, we're pretty long form here. We go long. But
media.
Yes, exactly. We're going to chop that up for you and make sure that throughout the week from our conversations, because sometimes we're previewing things, sometimes we are recapping things, sometimes we're talking about big picture items. We want to make sure that you can find all of that in our newsletter. So make sure to stay tuned with Black Rosie Media. Okay, let's get to the game. As mentioned, it was a win for the New York Liberty, as I mentioned, and as the broadcast mentioned as well.
Mm-hmm.
It was a hard fought win. And I think, honestly, if I think about this, Roberta, in part, at least part of this hard fought win, and we'll get to the graphic in a minute. Hey, I see you. We're going to get to this in a minute. I love that, Ronnie. I love that. I think, and it kind of actually, those two players, Ronnie is right on. It's like we've got telepathy or something going on here.
Yeah.
But these are two defensively, not just because a lot of teams will say, well, we pride ourselves on defense. It's becoming more popular now, which I personally love. But these are two teams that have the personnel to do it, to really go out and make things difficult. Obviously, Connecticut is another team that can do that really well. The Lynx we've seen them be able to do that. You were talking about Cheryl Reeve earlier. And so I think what we saw is that these two teams, especially because they played each other, Huerta, only about a week ago, or exactly a week ago, right? That they kind of had the scout, right? And so they were taking things away and had to grind through that. I mean, that's kind of my takeaway. What are your thoughts from this game?
Yeah, I think because the Storm has played the Liberty before the Olympic break, and the Liberty always had a good advantage. I Coming back to Roni's comment, I do think that Gabby was a big differential. At times she was defending Stewie, and then yes, Stewie ended up with I also had the box score here. She had 14 points, but when you look at her first half, she had only 1 point, and she was 0 for 5 from the field. That's not good. When you have Stewie with 1 point halfway through the game, it means that she's being defended really well.
Yeah.
And that defense is brought to you by Gabby Williams, who honestly, that's one of my favorite matchups in women's basketball. The Gabby and Stewie, they've played together. They've played against each other. They play against each other in the W and in FIBA basketball, and I think that that's the kind of matchup that both players players usually like to have, because it challenges them and it gives them the opportunity to show their defensive prowess, and also, like, how they can't get around things, because that's what Stewie did in the second half. You go back to that fourth quarter, and Stewie was on Stewie playoff mode. She had 10 points only the fourth quarter. She was 4 for 6. So excuse me. So that was not an easy game by any means. Um, See, Stewie has the funniest best games ever. That is true, because she's like, I'm gonna have a bad game, and then she comes back from halftime. She had the Space Jam water and just like goes off. Uh, and she's the kind of player that you want to have having a reaction, when you think of it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Jewel had a very inconsistent game too. She had 0 points in the fourth quarter, and that's not something. At the end of the day, she ended up having 6 points only, shooting 3 for 8. The Storm doesn't have privilege of having an off night against the Liberty.
Right.
The Liberty is a team. The Storm has had turnover issues in the past. The turnovers were very close in general. The Storm has an average of 13.4 turnovers per game. They had 13 turnovers today. The difference is that against the Liberty is a team that's going to make you pay for your turnovers. And that's what the Storm experienced today. They allowed, I think, 15 points of turnovers. So that is something, the rebounds also. The Storm kind of got a little messed up. It was trying to get out. There was a point over there when I don't know if we're talking about that 17-2 run at the end.
Yeah, we can talk about it now. You mentioned it because we might as well. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. So go ahead.
Yeah, no. So there were some disconnects on the court that just didn't make sense. One thing that stood out to me, there was like a travel by Jordan Horston that she just jumped with the ball and didn't know who to throw. It's almost like, when you freeze, that I feel like that's what happened um, to Jordan at that moment. At that moment, she had only 2 points, so there was a lot of that, and the New York Liberty did know how to capitalize on the Storm miscues, because they really took advantage of it and were able to score. One thing that Skylar Diggins actually pointed out in the post game presser, which when you look at it, it's very concerning. The Liberty was 19-2 in fast break points.
Yes. Yes.
19-2. That is a big difference.
They have the graphic here where you can see it in the chart, but then also it's where are we? Right here, fast break points. That's massive. And on the New York Liberty broadcast, what we were hearing a lot is that the New York Liberty, they love to pass. I think there was at some point late in the second half, I think they had 10 or so, because so we must have been, anyway, it was the first half. And I think they had 10 field goals or something like that. They were saying off from 9 assists. That's like, that's how much they like to pass the ball. Now, I do think there were times where they passed it maybe too much. They got late into the shot clock. There were some shot clock violations that counted for turnovers. But when the Liberty is playing well, and if I'm not mistaken, Sandy Brondello at practice yesterday, shout out to Miles Ehrlich, who actually shared that audio with me because I am not in New York right now. The homies always looking out. But that was one of the things that she talked about, Sandy Brondello, the head coach for the New York Liberty, that the team focused on because they had practice. We talked about how much they had a six game stretch where they were playing every other day, and that's coming immediately off of the Olympics. And so to have everyone healthy, to have some practice time, I think it's Jackie Powell has a story. I'm not sure if it's on the next, but she has a story up talking about the practices during the Olympic break where they were extended practices and why the team wanted to do that. And then another thing that Raz Goldonwude said on the broadcast is that the Liberty had this time in New York at home, getting rest, getting practices in. They had it circled. And this was a part of the season that they really wanted to hone in on. Now, that being said, and I said it in the Slack channel, I don't think Sabrina Ionescu looked a little off to me. I think it was also because, to your point, the Seattle Storm was playing very well defensively. They made problems for Stewie. They made problems for Sab. But even and I guess if you've ever been in a sport where you have a defender, that if you have hard defense, that will absolutely wear you down. So maybe that was a little bit of it. But I was expecting her to be a little sharper, coming out of, again, some time at home, some break. So I think there are definitely things that the New York Liberty didn't necessarily do well. But one thing that I absolutely loved, as you mentioned, was the fast break points. And that comes a lot from their assists. That comes from, again, Breanna Stewart talking to local media about that there was an emphasis on being able to communicate, being able to express and share not just the high moments and the joy, but also like, hey, like we need to straighten this out. And really, Sabrina has talked about this. They're able to communicate that in a better way than they were last year. But I love this also from Ronnie. Stewie is the closer. Absolutely. And and we talked about this when it comes to Stewie before last season. There were times where she mightily struggled. People love to talk about Stewie when she has an off night. God forbid she's not averaging, 25 points and watch. But what I like here, and this is why I like looking at a lead tracker, is that more often than not, the New York Liberty was able to keep the momentum, and a lot of that coming from playing in transition. They also got some good scoring when they had, Courtney Vandersloot 3 points, Kayla Thornton 3 points, Leo 5 points, and Niara no points. But they got significant minutes. Benajelani Hamilton, not her first game back, but her first start, leading the pack there. Sab, even though I did think she looked a little off, still went off for 17 points, able to find the teams there. So not her best night from 3-point range, but we talked about how, she's been able to balance things out a little bit more with her mid-range. And then of course we talked about Stewie, had a rough start and still ends with 14 points. Now on the other side of things, this is a question that was circling in my mind, and I didn't put it in our bullet points while we were on Slack talking about it, but there are also times where Ezzy, I think, gets a little lost offensively. And I want to ask you, okay, I have hit a nerve. Let me just leave it there because I'd love to hear you just react to where Ezzy is, because we saw this even in the Olympics, right? In a short tournament, you can have a fantastic Ezzy, like we saw in the bronze medal match. And then there are other times where she looks a little lost at the international level, even sometimes where, she looks like her size, as in more so the strength, I should say, her strength compared to some of the people that she's guarding is a problem. Now, listen, it's no Azare versus Aaliyah Boston. I don't know if you watched that game last night, but Azare was getting absolutely she was getting terrorized by Aaliyah Boston.
That whole game was insane.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a wild game. Anyway, so I don't think it's that level, but I do think sometimes Ezzy is really great. She's really strong and firm. And then other times she's a little more passive.
Yes, and that also has a lot to do with her personality, I think. She is known for being very, very soft-spoken, very passive. Jewel has said time and time again, like, be aggressive, like, show more of like your aggressiveness. And there was even a little funny bit, I think, last year that the Storm players were playing Uno or some other form of card game, and Ezzy just got very competitive, and she had like a very like whoa excited moment, and people are like, oh my god, it's kind of like when everyone was just waiting for the moment when Noe was gonna get her first stack, that when she did, everyone was super excited. So it has a lot to do with her personality. On top of that, I think that she has fallen a little bit on the scoring priority for the Storm.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because, and again, I have here another data set, and yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, because they have the core. The Storm has the core four, right? Jewel, NECA, Skylar, and Ezzy. Ezzy is the fourth of them in points. It's Jewel first, NECA second, Skylar third, and Ezzy 11th. And then, Ezzy fourth. But again, that's the whole season. That's not only post All-Star game. So I think it has to do with that. Also, all of the help that she has. There has been a big drop in her point average from before to after the All-Star game, the break, because there was a big campaign for Ezzy to be in the All-Star game, and there were talks that she was snubbed. She was scoring 13 points per game and getting 8.7 rebounds per game, averaging 2.4 blocks per game. Right now, she's averaging 8.9 points and 6.8 rebounds and 1.7 blocks. So I think that it has more to do with where the Storm is right now with the pieces that they have. Again, last year it was Jewel and Ezzy scoring the most. Um, they didn't have, one of the best scorers in league history, Neko Ogumake, who just had, I think, her seventh season with 500 points or something like that. Um, so it's hard. I think that, again, when we are in such a condensed league of only 100 and something players, if you are not top of the top, you end up falling for that spot where, like, oh, what's going on? And I think that's what's happening with Ezzy. I think that it is an adaptation to her current role with the Storm, especially with Skylar being on fire. Oh my God. So I believe that that's what's happening. And again, the team itself, her teammates always tell her to be more aggressive. It's just not her personality. She's an amazing player. She's dominant. And I think this is something that she's going to learn with time. She's still young.
Yeah, that's true. I do think it's it's interesting to hear her numbers. I didn't realize the tail was or that she was tailing off that much, but I think I do think the last point is one that makes sense. She is still a younger player. She's a player, from Australia. So this always blows my mind, but this is definitely a sidebar, but it always burns my grits, as I like to say, that we have leagues here in the United States, so domestic to the United States, where there is an age kind of there are restrictions, right, as to how young effectively, because you can be as old as you want, as far as I know. I don't know. Ask Nancy Lieberman about that, unless Stephen A. Smith already did. I don't know. I didn't listen.
Oh my God.
I know, I couldn't help it. Anyway,
Ezzy is 25 years old.
Yeah, but she's played already 3-4 seasons.
Yes, she is in her 4th season.
Okay, so yeah, well, she's about on par, I guess. But anyway, the point is that you'll have some players though on the international level who can come in a little bit younger for any league, because there's no cap on international players. But we as a society in the United States, until there was a lawsuit in NWSL, which I think is badass, where we don't allow young women to make the decision to go professional in sports. They have to go through the college system, which I think is very interesting. And people are like, well, what about their education? And I'm like, well, here's the thing. Some people don't go to college at all. Some people go to college later. But that there's a window, right, to play professional sports. And arguably, if you make your money playing pro, you can go to college and pay for it whenever the heck you want. Don't even get me started now on influencer. Anyway, like I said, that's a sidebar. But I think when it comes to Ezzy, maybe it's her personality, but I don't know. There's a part of me that doesn't want to make that a complete cop out, because I mean, she's still an athlete, right? And we've seen her be able to be fierce and ferocious. So I think it's going to be interesting. So that leads me to also ask about another player, because I want us to start thinking moving forward. Sammy Whitcomb was able to play a huge role for Australia, but she too seems to be getting a little lost in the Storm sauce here.
Yeah. And again, I think that because Samuel is also always a big defensive help. She is really good with defense. But now there is Gabby, right, who bridges a pretty big gap. She is Skylar's main reserve. And Skylar has been balling. She has become the player that you can't take her out of the game. You need to keep her there. So that reduces her minutes, and that, causes like a decrease in Sammy's role, which is natural in sports. That's not to say anything, but that's how I think it's a rotation thing. And I don't know if you remember the last conversation, the last podcast uh, that we recorded. That there was a very interesting lineup stat, and the best scoring lineup in this for the Storm was Naka Ogumake, Skylar Diggins-Smith, Jewel Lloyd, Ezzy Magbegor, and Jordan Horston, who, playing 14.1 minutes per game, were scoring 30.3 points per game. That was the best, most efficient lineup for the Storm. Fast forward, now the best scoring lineup for the Storm is still Neka Ogumake, still Skylar Diggins-Smith, still Jewel Lloyd, but now it's Gabby Williams and Ezzy, and they have been playing about 15.8 minutes together per game and scoring 33.3 points. So I remember that there was someone who was worried about Jordan Horston now that Gabby has been in. I'm not worried because, again, just like you said, these people are athletes. They know how their industry works and they are up for the challenge and they want to win, like it or not. Like Jordan wants her team to win, Nika Mill wants her team to win. So it's okay if they don't play if it means that the team is winning. I mean, I'm sure that they're not completely happy about it, but uh, that's the lineup that is working. And today, that was the lineup that was stopping Brianna Stewart. Um, but again, when Brianna Stewart gets like on her, you know, nobody stops me mode. That's what happened in the second half. But on the first half, it worked, and I think that Gabby has said that she's like Jordan Horston's number one fan, that she's so excited to see her growth because she's her mentor. So I think that this moment for the Storm is very different from pre-break because they have different pieces and they have highly impactful pieces. You can't ignore the presence of a Gabby Williams. You can't ignore the presence of a Skylar Diggins-Smith. And that means that Jordan's going to play less and Sammy's going to play less and Ezzy's going to score less. Uh, so I think that that's what's going on. And I think I said that in the previous podcast also, the identity crisis in the Storm, and I think that's part of it. Figuring out what are the lineups, who needs to score this time, who are we going to activate here. So Gabby was able to hold Stewie. What about the next game? Does Gabby play well against this player? Is it Sammy? I think that the Storm is figuring out. I do think that at the end of the day, Noe is doing a good job of figuring out those lineups. We saw it in the previous game against the Connecticut Sun, um, and she has been powering Gabby. So that resulted in Gabby today scoring 17 points. So, and she brings exactly something that Skylar has been talking about a lot. Which is the effort. Uh, Gabby is that player. She is greedy. She's a hustle player, and she is going to play her hardest, and she's going to use her. I mean, that interception, I don't even call, still, I call that interception. She's going to give it all of her.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of moving pieces. I think it's a team that has big names, big players. The Storm has had big names, big players in the past. However, they had already been playing for years together.
Which leads me to a fantastic question in the chat, one that New York Liberty fans know well because it plagued us all last season, to the point where a guard for the Las Vegas Aces that shall absolutely not remain nameless. Her name is Kelsey
Woof,
Plum.
woof.
What felt confident saying they don't care about each other. That is what she said. Now, what she may have meant, I get a sense, but what you said, Plum Dog, totally different. Anyway, I'm not letting that
Yeah.
go. I'm never letting that go.
I
Anyway,
know.
this is the question. Roberta, does Seattle have enough chemistry?
That's a really good question. And, does the Seattle Storm have enough chemistry? The short answer is no. That's the short answer for now. Because you sometimes I try to put it together, and I really want people to like understand the size of like the how big those players that are in the Storm now are. Like Neko Gumake, Skylar Diggins Smith. Those are not players that you play about. Those are WNBA top players in history. Both are WNBA champions. Both are outstanding in their roles. Uh, and we saw NECA today. She had an off game, but you see how consistent NECA has been. Consistency is not something that Jewel Lloyd is known for.
And that's interesting. Just to chime in here briefly, that was a little bit of the issue with Jewel Lloyd and the Storm last season. Now, where I think, I don't know that it's overlooked. If I'm going to be blunt, I think the Seattle Storm as a whole were overlooked last season, just given their record. But when you have a scoring season like Jewel Lloyd had, and if I'm not mistaken, Huberta, that was the first season where Jewel Lloyd was really stepping into that leadership veteran role. But she also was playing the point guard. So she was not only taking on a leadership role, but she was playing effectively. We had that whole poll that you put up on social media. Is Sab a 1 or a 2? I think it's an easier answer with Jewel. She's a 2 guard.
Yeah, she's a 2. She's a 2. She's not a 1. And in terms of chemistry, there has been so much change with the Storm in the past 2 years.
Exactly. They lost Stu Bird. They lost Stewie. Sorry. And that was the point that I was making. Jewel Lloyd is the carryover, right? From those last championships. And so she's playing a new position on the court. She is playing a new role as far as just leadership overall, but then she's anchoring a team that in their very recent history has been a contender.
Exactly. That's the big thing. The Storm has been known as a contender of in the WNBA history. Only 3 teams have won 4 titles, and the Storm is one of them. It's the Comets, the Lynx, and the Storm. But everything shifted after Sue left, because Sue left, Stewie left. And chemistry is not a given. Chemistry is built in any part, in anything in life. And I think that the Storm is building that chemistry. They were like progressing really well before the Olympic break. And then when the Olympic break came, it kind of like fell through. And that's when you have Skylar Diggins Smith being very vocal and being very, being just straightforward about it. We need to get on the game and play. We need hustle. We need effort. Today she said that again. She was like, we can have like a 19-2 in fast break points. So I do think they need to know each other better. I do think that when I say identity crisis, I think that it's a lack of chemistry. I think it's lack of chemistry, and that's okay. Like that's something that you build, but
but it makes it difficult if you or the media or any combination. I mean, here's the thing, right? It was actually Megan Rapinoe who told me this. She's like, of course, every athlete wants to win a championship when they're playing in a season, because if you don't want to do that, then you might need to ask yourself why you're playing. So let's put that, like, that's a given. Of course, the Seattle Storm are playing for a championship. Now, there's the playing in the immediate, the intermediate, and then the long term. And I think if you really were asking teams and players, I would argue probably the teams with the best shot at winning a championship probably have at least a broad stroke answer of where the team falls in the immediate, intermediate, and long term when it comes to capturing a title, right? But when you have that pressure, I used to use the term easy bake oven for the New York Liberty compared to the Las Vegas Aces that were like, a nice overnight marinated, perfectly tempered, meal.
Yeah.
And the New York Liberty were just, something you pop in the microwave.
Exactly.
And it's not to be disparaging. Sometimes you got to eat microwave food, because you still got to eat. But the fact that the Liberty were able to get to the finals without having that background, that was huge. And we know is a building block on what they have done, from book clubs to how they communicate, to the things that they did in the break. And so I want to get into that on the Liberty side a little bit more in a little bit. But as you were talking, because again, we're seeing some of the reporting. I mentioned Jackie Powell. She just wrote about this. Definitely check out that article. So then my question, if you're talking about this drop off, Ezzy is one thing. She was an Olympian. Again, we know that she had a lot of work to put in for Team Australia. If there was a drop off from a player like Skylar Diggins-Smith, who wasn't competing in this Olympics, what kind of, can you take us back to what the structure for the Seattle Storm looked like during the Olympic break? And, are you concerned maybe that there's a little bit of lag in perhaps some of what they did during the Olympic break manifesting on the court?
That's kind of what everyone has been asking themselves when it comes to post-Olympic break Storm, because it's such a starking difference from the pre-Olympic break team. It was almost like you couldn't recognize that team on the court. And I think that there is lack of chemistry. I think that perhaps Noe being away on the break, I think that this is such a unique situation, because you have a team that has so many new pieces. They were building the chemistry, and then there's a big break in the middle with no games. You're still practicing, you're doing yoga. They have a team yoga session, but something in this halfway point did not click. Something broke the trajectory, like there's a roadblock there. Something happened. And to be honest, I don't think neither the players nor Noe have talked about that in any presser. The harshest, I would say, the most candor that we have heard about it has come from Skylar Diggins-Smith.
And she recently had a quote too, I guess in Connecticut. I think it was Percy asking, I always want to say Percy Jackson because of those books.
Yeah.
No, it's Percy Allen. Anyway, from the Seattle. But Percy, if I'm not mistaken, was asking effectively, was there any lack of faith or belief? Was there any doubt? And Skylar also squashed and quelled that as well. But I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is interesting. And whether or not you quote unquote lose faith in your team, and I don't think we need to be hyperbolic. If the team's not saying that, they certainly haven't thrown in the towel. They're gonna go to the postseason, for crying out loud. So we're not trying to catastrophize what's happening here, but this is the time. And to take this to the New York Liberty for a little bit here, this is the time to troubleshoot. I talked about the Indiana Fever game because I was on assignment for that game last night with CBS. So I was really taking an inventory on what was said and what I think was supposed to happen. And for me, this is a really good stretch of games for Indiana to really show their mettle, right? To show what they're made of. The New York Liberty, John Cole Jones said that right after the game on the court. We said it again in post media. And you can only imagine that that's because the team is talking about this is a time for us to work on what we need to work on, right? And so, the next question that I have then, and I have the Storm schedule here, what does this next stretch of games look like? We know the New York Liberty have the Aces on Sunday, but for the Seattle Storm, what do you need to learn from the Storm? They also play the Aces. They play Phoenix, I think, twice, because they play Phoenix next. They play LA. They play Dallas. They play LA twice. They play Phoenix twice. They play Dallas, that's no layup team, so to speak, especially not now. Dallas definitely feels like they have a lot to prove. I think they're going to run out of runway, but we still have one spot open. And then they're taking on Vegas. What do you need to see? What do you need to learn? How do you want Seattle to go into these next handful of games?
Yeah, they need to show up, and they need to shut down all of the noise around the team. They need to crush the doubts that have been coming over the team. All of the the comments about lack of chemistry. And again, when we had our pre-Olympics podcast, I was like, I am not concerned about the Storm. They have like very winnable games. And now I'm concerned.
I think I said the same thing, and I'm like, oh, maybe I am a little worried.
Yeah. So, because I mean, now we understand that the Indiana Fever is, crushing right now. So they had the Indiana Fever, but they lost to Atlanta, they lost to Indiana, they lost to Washington. Those were games that they had to have won.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think Skylar also alluded to that. She's like, listen, I forget exactly what her wording is, but if I remember the sentiment, she was saying, it's not that we take a look at games and are like, oh, well, we should beat this team, at least not in a disparaging way to the other team, because she's already been on record in a very aggressive and very straight to the point way. If you do not show up, you will lose. Like,
exactly.
Period.
Yeah.
And that is this is, it's a new era of the WNBA, yes, and it's also a return to like the Maya Moore heyday, where you knew that Maya and the Lynx, right, and NECA, and among others, Candace Parker, and the point guard, like that was a stacked team. They had a beard. Like, come on!
Oh my god, that was such a good.
My point is, if you didn't show up, you were not only going to likely lose. I mean, you still had Tamika Catchings in the league for some of this stretch. Sylvia Fowles, come on!
Oh my god!
If you did not show up, Sue Bird, if you did not show up, you were going to lose. And the matchups that we saw in the playoffs, they came down to will, not just skill.
Yeah, exactly.
And that to me sounds like what you feel is missing from Seattle. And honestly, it's a familiar feeling, I'm sure, for New York or familiar sentiment for New York Liberty fans, because that felt like that's what was missing On paper, the New York Liberty last year absolutely could make it and did make it to the final.
Exactly.
But they ran out of gas, right? They ran out of gas. Some of those games in the finals were ugly.
You get to the final, to that shot by Sloot. Oh my God. You know, yeah, it is that time, and NECA has talked about it. She Captain Crunch. Yeah. So NECA has said that, like, every night you can win or lose, you know. Like she said, I have played in seasons where there was a clear winner, and I have played in seasons when you never knew who was going to win, and that's the season that we're playing. And like, you have statistics, you have numbers that it's more likely that the Storm is going to beat Atlanta. It's more likely that Connecticut's going to beat the Storm, and then that doesn't happen.
Right. And that season has been that, and not consistently, but there's pockets. I mean, Washington went on a run where they were like, we don't care who we're going to beat you, or at least fourth quarter. That was kind of Atlanta. Atlanta was the bugaboo for New York last year, you know, and really took us to task. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think, again, whether we're talking Indiana, Connecticut, Minnesota, obviously New York, and, you know, the other 3 teams, I guess, we know which teams are going to the postseason. But what we're also starting to hear players say, coaches say, is that the momentum that you carry into the postseason, the attitude, the way you're playing, I almost said hockey. Hockey's a thing to record later. The way that you're playing matters. So these games still matter. And at least for the New York Liberty, well, they should have clinched, I think, did they officially clinch?
They don't have the first spot yet.
I think for the first round, well, obviously, I'm assuming they'll get first round home court advantage.
Yeah.
They still have a few more games before they capture the first overall seed, which they almost did last year, but they still have a little work to do. And so let's take a look at their schedule. They're going to play, I mentioned it, on Sunday, they play the Vegas Aces. Now, listen, Vegas has not had a great season, but I'm going to tell you what. I don't think I like New York Liberty playing Vegas this late in the season.
No.
I don't like it.
You know,
I don't like it. Now, I'm not saying they're going to lose on Sunday. I really like how New York is playing. Vegas, I think they still have a little bit of work to do to get the goodwill for this year. They had all the goodwill last year, but they don't have it right now. That's just facts. But then New York is going to play Dallas twice. About 4 hours from me in Arlington, not Dallas. But anyway, then they host Minnesota.
Oof, that's also a dangerous one.
They play at Washington, and then they host Tina Charles in the Atlanta.
The New Yorker herself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, you know she's from New York? Anyway, that's a throwback. We're not going to get into that right now. Anyway. Yeah. So it's not an easy stretch, but it's definitely a manageable stretch for the New York Liberty. As I said before, Dallas is not a layup. What Dallas is, unfortunately, for another season, is inconsistent. And a lot of that came because Dallas has been hurt.
Yes,
they have been injured. I mean, can we please get one of the Sabali sisters to have a fully healthy season? I just want to see it once. Because I think it would be fantastic. You know, so it's not easy here. I love this. I just want to go back to Ronnie's comment. We grazed on it, but Seattle missing a Captain Crunch, I freaking love that. The Liberty is damn good in the fourth quarter. Now this I like, Ronnie, because the Liberty hasn't always been, and they can be inconsistent, but that is one of the things that it feels like this team has worked on, is closing. Damian saying Las Vegas, Dallas twice, Minnesota, Washington, and Atlanta. Again, we just went through that schedule. You know, and we talked about a couple of episodes ago. I don't think, Hobet, that you were on that episode. I think I was with Misha. talking about how many games, this is coming back from the Olympic break. How many games do we think the New York Liberty lose, right? I want to just looking at this schedule. Do you see 4 wins here?
You mean for the Liberty, not the Storm?
For the Liberty, yeah, for the Liberty. Vegas, Dallas twice, Minnesota, Washington, Atlanta. You think they can get 4 wins to lock up number 1?
I think that the only team they would lose to is Minnesota. That's my guess.
Ooh, okay.
That's my guess.
Yeah, they've had difficulty with Minnesota,
Yeah.
Commission up.
Yeah, I think that they are gonna struggle with Minnesota. It's a really good team, and again, any team that's coached by Cheryl Reeve is going to be very dangerous in the stretch. That's and they are gonna be out for blood. They are gonna be because they also want to secure home court advantage. They have a chance at it, so I think that because of the Liberty depth and because Las Vegas has been lacking depth, I think that New York takes that game.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough still. Vegas and Minnesota will be tough, but if the Liberty can stay focused and composed, then they'll have a shot at the number 1 seed and maybe in the postseason. That's Damien. I agree. I think I like that you said Minnesota is the one they got to watch for, because just looking at the games to this point, the Liberty has been able to handle Minnesota. I think Washington is an interesting team. I'm not expecting the Liberty to lose to them. But again, I think they kind of enjoy playing spoiler right now, right? Seems that way. And Dallas is a tricky team. What version of Dallas is going to show up?
That's the thing, because Arike can also be very dangerous.
Oh.
She can carry a game herself and get the win for the team.
Lethal. So, I mean, she is making a career, not literally, I'm being hyperbolic here, but she definitely gets to another level when it's USA versus Team WNBA All-Stars.
Oh my God.
And she has made it a point that she will always be on Team WNBA. She's like, don't even call me no more for USAB. I ain't doing that. She's like, but I'll cook y'all up so you can win another gold medal.
Exactly. It's
so and again, Satu, a healthy Satu makes a world of difference for that Dallas team.
Yeah, absolutely. They had the pieces for it. There has just been. I think it's also an organization issue. They have had so many issues, but that's another conversation. It's like that one is such. Oh my God! Someday,
there's a lot there. I think they're trying, but are they trying in earnest? Are they trying hard enough? Questions that
I'm just gonna say one thing. There was a logo on Nancy Lieberman's shirt when she said what she said.
Oh,
and that's it.
I didn't look that close. Oh, dang. Now I'm gonna have to look. Oh, do I even want to? I wasn't paying attention. Because I'm like, I'm
gonna send you a link.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna get mad right before bed. Okay. Hannah's saying the thing about the last 2 games is it could be a scenario where we've locked up the 1 seed and those 2 teams are fighting for the playoffs, and that sometimes happens. I know a lot of people have asked, like, why does everyone play? And basically everyone plays on the last day and almost like at the same time on the final day of the season. And actually Nikki Cullen, who now coaches at Baylor, talked about this. That's actually something that came through the coaches. I forget. There's like it's not committee, but I can't remember. But there are these meetings that they have. And one of the things that they wanted is that so people aren't throwing games, late. Anyway, so Yeah, so that's why that is, but to this point, what's happening everywhere else, you can't really worry about that. And it doesn't seem like the New York Liberty are. I don't get the sense that, if we're being honest, the Seattle Storm can't even really start thinking about other people because they have plenty on their to-do list. So for either one of these teams, I don't think the players, and likely not, Noel Quinn, like, save that for maybe an assistant coach, who's doing the scouts once we get closer to that final week. But you got to think that these two teams, for different reasons, but both very intently, are not going to be focused very much on the standings as they pertain to other teams, and are really going to lock in on what they need to do. And for me, that's exactly the mentality that you need if you're going to be competitive and, dare I even say, have a deep run in the playoffs, because that's when it really is all or nothing. You have to show up, you have to advance, and you have to do it by any means necessary. And that's where, for our next podcast, for Tempestagi Talk, as well as Gotta Get Up, a podcast. I love that you love it. And Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. We're really going to start breaking this down, because I think we're in two different places with these teams when it comes to the support, the trust, and quite honestly, the experience of the second wave, that being the bench players, the reserve players. And we kind of talked about this because there's been some things that have been shaken up. Also mentioned Tina Charles. You remember, she was like persona non grata in Seattle that year. And it's not to compare Tina and Gabby. What I will say is, situationally, it is difficult for the player coming in, for the team, for the players that are going to lose minutes or won't be the go-to option. It can be difficult to make those changes late in the season. And even though Gabby Williams is returning to a team that she's, or for a franchise that she's played with, not necessarily the same because of all the roster changes. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. We'll close out with these comments. The Liberty can and have shown that they can put a streak together. Absolutely. So in my opinion, 34-6 is how they finish the regular season. I think we all pretty much talked about that on the last episode. Damien saying Liberty are 6-2 against Minnesota, Las Vegas, and Connecticut this year. That's a pretty good record. That's a pretty good record.
Yeah.
That's a really good record. So, I like the odds, but they still got to win the games. Well, it's always a pleasure, Roberta, to chat with you. I'm so excited that we have a logo, we have a name. We are out here doing things on Tempestagi Talk, keeping an eye on the Seattle Storm.
And I am hoping to get that writing going very soon.
Listen, Damien, I'm not going to forget this. I saw your comment earlier and I couldn't get to it regarding Courtney Vandersloot retiring, getting Skylar Diggins-Smith. First of all, like, there's a place in me that exists where this is very exciting. And then there's another part of me that understands that because of the situational reality independently between these two players, and also kind of where the New York Liberty franchise tends to be heading, or unfortunately, I don't see this happening anytime soon, if at all.
I agree.
But it's interesting, and I think there was a time where I thought Skylar Diggins-Smith would be perfect because we don't have sandpaper, we don't have enough sass sometimes for the New York Liberty, and she's got that in spades. I mean, to be honest, so does Tina Charles. But those two are journey women. Some would say for a reason. I think Tina gets a lot of crap that she doesn't deserve. I've said that multiple times, even as she's sometimes dishing it to me. I'm like, listen, you got to respect Tina Charles. You got to respect Skylar Diggins-Smith, and their paths have been winding roads. But you got to take what they give to your team. If you're smart enough, if you have a team that's composed enough, they will do wonders. And all of that said, I think they're in the right place right now, each one of them. I don't think that it makes sense for them to be with New York, even though Skylar's already played for Sandy. So And she had nothing but nice things to say about Sandy. Maybe not so great things to say about Phoenix toward the end of her tenure, but ooh, you know. Now Gabby, y'all already know how I feel about that. I damn near cried. I damn near cried on camera thinking about Gabby Williams coming to the New York Liberty. And listen, I don't know. I'm not going to do that. We can talk about that offline. You and I over at that. Anyway, this is another thing, Damien, that we'll talk about. We don't have time for today's episode because both Roberta and I have to transition, but keep this in mind, Damien. I'm going to remember this, but make sure to, if you're around, you usually hop on. We love that you hop on with us.
Yeah.
But type this in the chat next time because this is going to be a good one. Yeah, this is going to be a good one. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you for joining our post-game live on Tempestagi Talk meets Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. And if you missed it, I just got to drop it one more time for y'all. Bow. Hold on, let me get the comment.
So good.
Wow, Gotta Get Up. We got a new logo for Gotta Get Up as well. Very New York. We doing big things.
Yeah.
Ronnie, thank you for coming through. We appreciate you. We know it's late on the East Coast, down south. Yeah. We appreciate y'all coming through. And we don't have to awkwardly wave anymore because I finally uploaded. The Black Rosie Media end credits. So we'll do a quick wave and then we'll get out of here. All right. Thanks, Damien. We'll catch you next time. Good night, everybody. Peace out.
Good night, everyone.